Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 315, He Fumbles at Your Soul. Now, this is one of those poems that has been much debated by so many readers and certainly scholars of this poem. When it was published in 1896, it was actually titled The Master. Now, of course, Emily didn't call it that, and there's a whole lot of debate about what this riddle poem is actually about. It is a 14-line offering, but there have been some who argue you can't really call this a sonnet, although we can go ahead and say that there does have a lot of sonnet qualities about this poem. Certainly that final couplet, as we will look at it when we read it, it is another one of those vague antecedent poems. In other words, notice, he fumbles at your soul. He, who is the question? And of course, are we speaking about maybe possibly a speaker? Are we talking about possibly God? Now, the scholar Priest will point out that one of the earliest biographers of Emily, George Wisher, made the argument that Emily is probably referencing a noted preacher, a close friend of Emily's, Charles Wadsworth. We've mentioned him before already, whom Emily may have heard preach when she went to Philadelphia in March of 1855. There is a possibility that she doesn't have that speaker in mind, but another speaker in mind. She would say in letter 175 of 1854 to Mrs. Holland, who we've mentioned already as well, quote, whoever it is she's talking about, he quote-unquote a hellfire preacher, if you will. He preached, quote, he preached such an awful sermon, though, that I didn't much think I should ever see you again until the judgment day. The subject of perdition seemed to please him somehow, end quote. It is now going to be one of the ways we read this poem to try to figure out what exactly is it she's referencing. Now, it is true that this poem contains one of those famous lines of Emily, scalps your naked soul. It's a remarkable line, and when we get there we want to pay attention to it. Now, different people have seen this poem to be talking about different things. Some see it as religious conversion, some see it as death, some see it as sex or the fear of sex, the experience being so overwhelming that you're probably more fearful of it than you actually are seeing it as pleasurable. Some have seen this as Emily's talking about writing, or maybe even reading a poem, or listening to music, or listening, as we've said already, to a speaker. And in all of this, the question really is this maybe the conversion experience that Emily never knew or never had? It's possible. She's going to address this powerful feeling that will come over the speaker of the poem, we'll say Emily here, and in that regards, someone has tremendous power over her. Again, titled The Master in 1896. It reads like this. He fumbles at your soul as players at the keys before they drop full music on. He stuns you by degrees, prepares your brittle nature for the ethereal blow by fainter hammers, further heard, then nearer, then so slow. Your breath has time to straighten, your brain to bubble cool, deals one imperial thunderbolt that scalps your naked soul. When winds take forests in their paws, the universe is still. Now, it's a compelling poem. The movement, notice we go from fumbling to pause by the end of the poem. Notice we'll have soul mentioned at the end of the first line and then at the end of the 12th line. And notice both times capitalized. And again, whoever this is, we're not sure who she's referencing, or maybe we would argue what she's referencing in the he who fumbles at the soul. The word fumbles gets used one and only one time in all of her poetry, and it is here. But notice what she says. He fumbles at your soul, and then the simile, as players at the keys. Notice it's not player, but players. Capitalized, by the way, by her. At the keys. We'll be talking about a piano player and keys, and then a little bit later we'll get to the hammer. And of course the possibility of referencing Zeus and his thunderbolt and all of that. As players at the key, before they drop full music on, he stuns you by degrees. Now, we can't read, of course, a word like stuns and not immediately think of Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. He goes as one who hath been stunned and is of sense forlorn, a sadder and a wiser man. He wait the morrow morn. We've given full lectures on Rime of the Ancient Mariner at learnstrong.net. Think about, though, the power of that poem and that ending of that poem. That young man hears that story by that old man, who of course will tell the story of when he was a young man and the whole thing of the albatross around the neck and all of that. The story is something the young man identifies with and is then stunned, and I think here the words work rather nicely. Now, Emily will 2 more times use stun in powerful ways. First of all, in poem 505, she'll say it this way: I would not paint a picture, I'd rather be the one. Its bright impossibility to dwell delicious on, and wonder how the fingers feel, whose rare celestial stir evokes so sweet a torment, such sumptuous despair. I would not talk like cornets, I'd rather be the one, raised softly to the ceilings, and out and easy on through villages of ether myself endured. Balloon be but a lip of metal, the pier to my pontoon. Nor would I be a poet, it's finer, only ear, enamored, impotent, content, the license to revere, a privilege so awful that would the dower be, had I the art to stun myself with bolts of melody. And then when we get to poem 762, we'll play a similar game. She says it this way: the whole of it came not at once, 'twas murder by degrees, a thrust, and then for life a chance, the bliss to cauterize. The cat reprieves the mouse, she eases from her teeth just long enough for hope to tease, then mashes it to death. 'Tis life's award to die contender, if once, then dying half, then rallying for connoisseur eclipse. This idea of the cat playing with the mouse here, notice there's something that happens where the power so stuns, and again by degrees, and prepares then your brittle nature for the ethereal blow. You'll remember ethereal from poem 232 when we played the game. Our assumption, of course, is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net and you've read all the previous poems. I'm hopeful that you've done that. We just finished with 314, nature sometimes sears a sapling, which obviously that word sears, and then of course the word scalps will take us in this poem as well. Notice it's almost like being prepared, set up, so that the ethereal blow will happen by fainter hammers. By the way, some have pointed out that maybe this is Emily's discussion of potential sexual types of relationships. Notice we go from fainter to nearer to slower. By fainter hammers, further heard than nearer, than so slow. From slow we go to still, right? Your breath has time to straighten. Remember how she used that phrase, straighten, in poem 310? Your brain to bubble, cool. So notice we go from fumbling to bubbling. Deals one imperial thunderbolt. Zeus comes to mind here, right? That scalps your naked soul. You'll remember that in poem 314, it was nature sometimes sears a sapling, sometimes scalps a tree. Scalps your naked soul. And again, some have made a point of the fact that she uses the word naked here as something referring to her interests or her concerns about sexuality. And then there's the break and then the final couplet to finish this sonnet, if you wish to think of that. When winds take forests, and we're going to hear about winds and the wind in the next poem, 316. When winds take forests, by the way, originally she had the word hold as possible here. Instead, it's take. Forests, notice capitalized, in their pause, the universe is still. And again, taking us back to poem 505, Emily takes us in some ways, one scholar has put it this way, Emily takes us into the primal forest where scalping is done. Another scholar has said, a moment of anticipation and ambiguous fulfillment. In other words, when the wind starts blowing in the forests, taking them by the wind's paws, the forest, the universe is still. In other words, after a tornado comes through, for example, a forest, everything is dead still. And of course, Emily's use of still is phenomenal. In 95 poems, she will use this word in one way or another. And I think, as we have said before, when we've come to this word, I think T.S. Eliot learned to use this word, you'll remember in his 4 quartets, we must be still and still moving into another intensity. What is this poem actually saying at 2a? I think the argument that she's making is that there is a feeling of being overwhelmed, and that feeling can be at the same time majestic and maddening. Of course, stunning is her word, right? The scalping, if you will, of the naked soul. At 2b, notice the power of the simple present tense in this poem and the way in which word choice matters, especially with that word fumbles. At 3a, well, I've mentioned already Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. I can't read this poem without somehow reflecting there. But there is another way to think of this as well, and it takes us back to a letter actually 93, that Emily wrote for Sue, and this happened in the marriage of Sue to her brother was about to happen in 1852, and 10 years before this poem gets written, she will use the analogy of female flowers longing for the sun that scorches them instead of the soul and the thunderbolt. And Miller points this out now at letter 93. And now I'm just quoting Emily writing to Sue, or who she calls Susie. You have seen flowers at morning, satisfied with the dew, and those same sweet flowers at noon with their heads bowed, and then she'll finish, bowed in anguish before the mighty sun. Think you these thirsty blossoms will now need naught but dew? No, they will cry for sunlight and pine for the burning noon, though it scorches them, scathes them. They have got through with peace. They know that the man of noon is mightier than the morning, and their life is henceforth to him. Oh, Susie, it is dangerous, and it is all too dear, these simple, trusting spirits and the spirits mightier, which we cannot resist. It does so rend me, Susie, the thought of it when it comes, that I tremble lest at some time I too am yielded up. That is to say, Emily may be worried about the possibility of having to give herself up, maybe in marriage to a man, is again the speculations. Finally, at 3b, what was a time when you understood this feeling of something so overwhelming, starting out maybe with a little bit of fumbling and ending with a thunderbolt, and you were in the end stunned and maybe even scalped? I hope Emily's challenging you. Thank you.